What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York, calling from the quarantine zone again, and this time we got Nemthea of the Almighty Dread Sovereign. Thank you so much for your time today, man. I appreciate you being here.
That's no problem. Yeah.
Yep. It's awesome to have you here. You have the brand new album out, Alchemical Warfare, scheduled to come out in 2021. You just want to talk about like how the making of this album was in terms of like the recording. Was there kind of like a thought process behind it? How did Alchemical Warfare sort of like come to be?
Well, it's the third album. The first two albums were on Van Records, and we started making it maybe at the beginning of 2019. Initially, it was supposed to be an EP, and then Metal Blade and ourselves, we agreed that no, it's no good to be an EP. It needs to be a full length album. So we had to write a couple more songs, and so we basically recorded the album over two sessions, and then we finished it about a year ago.
Mm-hmm. Being that you were working on some of these songs since 2019, and this was originally supposed to be an EP, are some of these songs, did these songs change a lot over a span of time, or like did you kind of like stick to your guns with the songs that were already made from when it was supposed to be an EP?
No, not really. Dread Sovereign is pretty instant. That's the way it's supposed to be. The way it's supposed to be designed is you go in, you rehearse, you rattle out a song, an idea, and you fucking leave it and record it. I'm not into picking the bones of songs over for a year or half a year. So it's very instant. We would rehearse for 4 or 5 days before we had to record. People come in with ideas, and we would just kind of rattle through it pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
We'd all play live in the same room. No file trading, no click tracks, nothing like this. It's three guys playing in a room together.
So it was a full organic process, you could say, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Do you feel that the first single that's off of this new album, Nature is the Devil's Church, could serve as a clear representation of what the entirety of the album is going to sound like? Or is that just one little taste of it?
No, it's the first few albums were a bit more doomy, a bit more obscure sounding, I suppose. A bit darker. This is still dark in its own way, but the new album has a bit more up-tempo. It's got a bit more new wave British heavy metal, Venom, Motorhead kind of vibe to it. It's a bit more, it kicks into gear a bit more. So the songs are obviously there's differences between the songs, but it's reasonably representative. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned like you try to capture a moment with the material, which I think is a very difficult thing to do in music. Do you almost feel like the longer you work on something, the harder it is to sort of maintain that moment in a way?
Yeah, I mean, heavy metal should be an instant process. It should be guts and glory, blood and thunder. You're not supposed to mull over it for a year or 2 years and keep editing and re-editing and cutting and pasting. It's supposed to be, at least my vision of it and what Dread Sovereign represents, it's supposed to be, quite an instant process. I don't really have the patience for it to be any other way, to be honest with you. So
Yeah, of course. Sometimes patience could almost be like, the downfall of art in a way because, if you work on it too long, it's not going to sound emotionally consistent or it's not going to be resonating with you as much, right?
yeah, and and you also the power of suggestion means you start to second guess yourself. And at least there's one thing about traditional heavy metal, the traditional blueprint of heavy metal. It's supposed to be young, dumb, and full of cum, or whatever you want to say, and you're not supposed to second guess yourself and overthink it. At least that's how I look at rock and roll, or whatever however you want to say it. So definitely, Dread Sovereign subscribes to the instant process within all of this, or at least um, I suppose the live fast, die young ethic of making heavy metal. And so therefore you go to the rehearsal room, make noise, argue, shout, iron it out, get into it, and then you record it and pretty much try and do it live, and that's it, really.
Does this at all maybe connect with or have any connection to For Doom the Bells Toll or even All Hell's Martyrs? Or do you also think that maybe this is a little bit more of a standout in the Dread Sovereign catalog in a way? Because you mentioned you up-tempoed things a little bit, so...
Now those albums have up tempo bits as well. Yeah, I mean it's the same three guys. It's the same people involved in some of the engineering and mixing. It's it's still me playing the bass, playing the same bass through the same amp. With so it's there's consistency throughout the three releases, but there's a development, there's a structural development, a dynamic development, and I suppose a musical development in that the energy and synergy and chemistry between the three of us after playing together more often, touring, grows. And so therefore it has an effect on the songwriting and the songs themselves.
Yeah, it's like not every album's like more or less a continuation of the last album. It's like just a continuation of evolution, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's either or. You can see them as a continuation if you want. I mean, it's got the same three characters on the artwork and in the aesthetic, and it's clear that it's the same three people, and the music is written by the same people. It has my signature, I suppose, on it. And this is the same person singing. So, yeah, of course, there's a consistency, a sort of artistic, creative consistency through it. But there's small but relatively acute changes in this one.
Awesome. Do you has there ever been a time where lyrics have ever influenced the direction of a song, like a concept helped dictate the direction, or have you always needed the music before you lay down the lyrics?
Well, the thing about it is that my life's work is primordial, of course.
Yeah.
So I have to create a distinction between primordial and Dread Sovereign. So the lyric writing in Dread Sovereign is quite different to primordial, whereas primordial might stand for something cultural, historically, or let's say it's a bit more serious. It's not that Dread Sovereign isn't serious and certainly not fantasy, but I do get to play around with concepts a bit more. Like, for example, the new album, the three characters are the lab assistants in Isaac Newton's lab, because I'm very interested in alchemy, the concept of the philosopher's stone, the sort of spiritual process that represents, and I suppose European hermetic occult orders, 15th to 18th century kind of post-enlightenment. I'm quite interested in that period of history, but specifically alchemy and this idea that science and magic were still intertwined. But at the same time, I approach it with a bit of a sort of gothic horror, occult horror kind of thematic to the lyrics. So I have kind of have a freedom to play around with the aesthetic and the artwork and the lyrics, which maybe I don't have normally. But yeah, so it's quite freeing in a way. You can pick maybe a great occurrence or happening from history and write a story around it, or pick something that seems to tie into the syntax and language of traditional heavy metal.
Yeah, well, it's funny that you're using these scientific and enlightenment developments as an influence for the music, because I was an art history major in college, and you learn on how like art and science and even philosophy all develop together. Like impressionism wouldn't have been able to exist without Haeckel's new theories and his scientific developments, and you see how Isaac Newton influenced like a lot of artistic development, and therefore philosophy was challenged as well, and that was there a need for spiritual entity? Was that just a substitute for not having the answers at that time? So I think addressing this subject matter in Alchemical Warfare is actually a really interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, I do the same thing in Primordial, only I suppose it's from a slightly more serious angle. Dread Sovereign isn't really got anything particular to say or to advise or lecture or warn. It's more telling the story, as I said, in the language of old heavy metal, kind of rabble-rousing, foot stomping, but also to have something beneath it. Like the first album, All Hell's Martyrs, is really about the Cathar rebellion in France and the Knights Templar, and it's so I've sort of steeped it in history a little bit, but written it around something that has the perfect language for the subject matter, that this sort of occult horror kind of feel to it, or dark occult kind of syntax, I suppose you could say. Traditional heavy metal syntax. But yeah, the concept of alchemy, and especially specifically, as you say, the intertwining of all those things, whether it's science and magic, religion, and the establishment of, I suppose, feudal states and city states across European history, and the early age of empires. And yeah, this kind of period of history speaks to me quite a lot.
Yeah, so I'd imagine that like research and literature and like kind of looking for inspiration is almost part as much a part of the songwriting for you as it is laying down bass tracks and vocals as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, these are things I've always been interested in, so it's no problem for me to find inspiration from all sorts of places, and things I've been reading for, well, years and years. So there's no strict hard or fast rule to what might inspire you to do something. I mean, the reality is it's three guys standing in a rehearsal room playing heavy metal together, and that is the structural basis of what Dread Sovereign is. The stuff that we're talking about, the lyrics, the aesthetic, the stuff. I mean, it is the sort of it's the top floor of the construction, so to speak.
Hmm.
It's the attic room, but yeah, it's all a fascinating process. The lyrics and the aesthetic are something that comes fairly um, easily once I have an idea of where we're heading.
Okay. That's so it's not like these concepts ever influence the sound of the music itself, right?
No, well, I mean, the music always has to be dark, and it has to be intense, and it has to sound like you mean it. It's got to have energy and vibrancy and conviction. That never changes, even if I was making acoustic music. So, Dread Sovereign has to have that vital, energetic, transferal about it, which is, of course, all the stuff that I love about all the old bands that inspired Dread Sovereign.
Yeah.
And that doesn't change.
Hmm.
But, of course, I've never made in all the records I've ever made, whether it's Primordial or Void of Silence or Trial of the Gods or anything, April Men, it all has a kind of dark hue to it. There's nothing particularly, how should we say, that resides on the sunny side of life, or has a particularly, I don't know. It's all dark stuff, I guess,
Yeah.
is the rather cliched.
Being that you are such a prolific artist between Dread Sovereign and Primordial, as well as playing, with Plague and Void of Silence and so many other previous bands, like, is it a different mind frame depending on any project that you're involved with, or is there maybe like a usual method behind the madness that sort of applies to everything?
No, they're all very different. I mean, the only thing running through them is me. I mean, Dread Sovereign has very little to do with Primordial. Obviously, I'm playing the bass in Dread Sovereign and writing most of the music. I don't do that in Primordial. So they all have their different. I mean, obviously, they're all making music, so they all have similarities. But there's a very different process of creativity behind them. Different people involved, different personalities to deal with, different record labels. So I suppose there are variations on a theme, but thankfully, the variations are well different enough to keep you to keep me, how can we say, to give me enough energy and passion to keep being involved in things like that.
Hmm.
Also, for me, I'm sort of have a kind of reckless, relentless energy where I need something new every 3 to 6 months to do. I can't. I'm no. This situation that we're living through now, this is not what suits me. I need to keep moving, keep doing things all the time. Sitting around at home for a year, taking a year off is not what interests me at all. So I have to keep moving. And so therefore, Dread Sovereign is just the next thing to move on to. I'm
Yeah.
sure there'll be something else after that. So
Yeah. It's like you, Phil Anselmo, and Mike Patton. You guys can never just have like one project to focus on. You always have to move in multiple directions.
well, Primordial is my life's work, so to speak, in that I've been doing it for nearly 30 years. But at the same time, and I don't want to do a band that sounds like Primordial, that would be pointless. But at the same time, it is interesting as an artist, as a creative person, as a musician, to work with other people and to challenge yourself and to try and step outside your comfort zone, to add new strings to the bow, and to try and apply yourself and like force things into being, or not. How can I say, the force of your will moves things into being, and that's exactly what I want to do with everything.
Yeah.
We started Dread Sovereign, people went, it won't last that long. And I was like, no, it's going to fucking last that long. And it will be on tour and it's going to make albums and this, and this. Like, there's no half measures in the things you aspire to do with your creativity, at least not for me. It has to have this relentless conviction to it.
Yeah, and going by the name of Nemtheanga, and again, I'm sorry if I'm horrible with pronunciations in case you couldn't tell, but
It's all right.
have you always felt like maybe in the projects that you're involved with, you were maybe portraying a character in a way, and that maybe each band is expressing a different side of who you personally are?
Yeah, it's not really a character, but I know what you mean. It's maybe a sort of a form of Jekyll and Hyde situation, I suppose. There are sides to your own personality. I mean, it's a different me that stands on the stage with Dread Sovereign and plays the bass in a small bar to 50 or 100 people on a tour, a back of the van tour, then plays to 10,000 people on a festival with Primordial. But it's still fundamentally me and the things that I've created. So they're just other strings to your bow, and as long as the bow is still, working and accurate, then I'm going to keep using it, I guess.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Because it's really interesting that when with what done with Primordial and what you've done with Dread Sovereign, it's like I still know that it's you, even though like you have completely different roles in every individual project. But I still know that it's you, which I think is very difficult. I feel like you have the bridge between being an experimental artist, but also having a sound that also defines you.
Yeah, I mean, the Irish people and the music that they make is always, I think, going to be riven through with a feeling of uh, um, tragedy, sadness, maybe even an element of melancholy somewhere underneath it. Irish people don't do, there's no Irish power metal bands. It doesn't really work like that. Irish people don't really do great rock stars, and they don't do symphonic, majestic, blah, 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 blah. So most Irish bands, metal bands, do have this gritty, dirt under the fingernails feel to them. Something quite raw emotionally, or quite. There's very few Irish bands that stand for nothing, let's say,
Yeah.
or are fantasy.
Does
It
it have?
doesn't seem to be the way we approach being creative. So on those terms, I think that I'm as much a part of the country as the country is a part of me.
Mhm.
I don't think I could make something that was just light relief, so to say.
Does it have to do because it's always raining there?
You're not that wrong. I think that geography and those kind of things do have an important part to play in the makeup of music. I mean, if you think about it, think about black metal, think about bands from the southern areas of black metal, whether it's Mystifier in Brazil or Rotting Christ in Greece or Sarcophago in Brazil, or bands from Colombia, or they don't sound like bands from the north.
Yeah.
There's a different feeling than that in Dark Throne or Immortal. And Irish bands tend to have this, I'm not sure how to describe it, this cinematic, windswept, sodden, earthy feel to them. And yeah, it's because it's a kind of beautifully miserable place to live. It's quite, there isn't much, there isn't much sunshine.
Yeah.
So when I hear a band who sounds like Immortal coming from California, something doesn't really fit to me.
Yeah.
So every region has to find its particular, I think, has an underpinning style. I mean, if you look at all the UK pagan metal bands, they tend to have a kind of particular feel to them as well, whether it's Fen or Winterfelleth or these kind of bands. So yeah, there is regional styles, geographical, I suppose, imprints. So you're not entirely wrong.
Yeah.
And also, I think culture, history, the history of Ireland is pretty bloody and tragic, and we're a small country.
Mhm.
So that, I think, the island mentality there's a sound that is particularly Irish, just like Iceland. If you listen to Solstafir or something, and you've ever been to Iceland, you go, oh yeah, this makes sense. Solstafir sounds like they're from Iceland, and I think these are important characteristics.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. My coworker said that he used to DJ and he did like a residency in the UK for a month, for a whole month, and he said he saw the sun 4 times the entire time. And I was saying, so that's why My Dying Bride, Paradise Lost, and Catatonia, or is Catatonia from Sweden? But My Dying Bride and
And
Paradise
that,
Lost always made great music.
yeah, yeah, and then to add into that anathema, there's a lot of bands from Yorkshire. Um, Back in the old Peaceville days, there was a particular, almost like a Peaceville sound. Um, there's a whole other load of bands from that area, probably now who've disappeared or who passed into myth and legend. But you can add in Anathema, old Anathema, and a few other bands into that. Do a bit of digging, and you'll find the chorus of ruins and enchantments, and there's some good old stuff from there. And yeah, it's a gloomy. It's got a sense of drama to it.
Yeah.
Whether it's the towns themselves, the harsh industrial north of England, as they call it, the satanic mills of progress. These old industrial towns, and the stone, this particular stone that everything is built with, and then of course the moors and the wilderness. Yeah, it's not hard to see why it sounds like that. And Primordial, I suppose, had connections to that scene back then. Even though we were a bit more black metal, we were still, as I said, riven through with this sense of tragedy and melancholy, just like those bands were.
Yeah. Well, there's also, coming from Ireland, there's a lot of subject matter just alone to grasp from. There's a spiritual side that lies within Ireland, but then there's also, the political turmoil with the IRA and, this,
Yeah.
this, terrible bloody history and the potato famine and so on and so forth. So I feel like there's multiple subject matters to channel your pain with as well.
Yeah, of course, no doubt. I don't think Irish people do. As I said, most of the new bands from here have got something to say about something. There's very few bands who are just fantasy for the sake of it, or just I suppose meaningless, fluffy, whatever.
Yeah, we'll leave that to you too.
It's partly the history, and it's partly the way that people are. So yeah, no, there's endless amount of subject matter that you could write about from here.
Yeah, yeah. Not to mention, I think the only band
But I mean, Dread Sovereign isn't about Irish history or anything like this. It's not rooted in Ireland. It's nothing like that. So, but of course, with the three of us playing in the band are Irish, and we have that affects the way we are and the way we write.
Yeah, and let me just say, with the times that we're living in right now, for Dread Sovereign to release a new album, as well as Catatonia, Paradise Lost, My Dying Bride, that made a little too much sense to me. But so
yeah, well, I think that, I mean, personally, if I had a Primordial album to release right now, I wouldn't release it.
Oh, really?
No, I wouldn't. To be honest with you, to be a little bit selfish about it, there's nothing in it for me to release some music now, because all I will do is speak on Skype and then watch numbers go up and down on a screen. There has to be gigs, touring, movement, agency, and humanity to the process of making music. And if that's removed, then the truth is I won't make any more heavy metal music. There's no point. So, to just be removed to being a square on a screen and a statistician is not the reasons why we started making music. So maybe those bands had their records ready already and just thought, well, we can't sit on them for another year.
Yeah.
So I think everyone has to hope that a way out of this will allow bands to go back to touring, because I can guarantee you that without touring and festivals, many bands will disappear.
Yeah.
Also, the economy for heavy metal musicians is completely dead, because no one streams enough to make any money from streaming, and that's not even the most important thing. Once you take away that traditional, I suppose, the rock and roll element, the touring, the getting in a van and getting out there with your gear, it ceases to be what it was. And I think if this goes on for another couple of years, which it very well might, you will just see lots and lots of bands disappearing.
Well, but
Me for one, if this goes on for years, yeah, you won't. There won't be another Dread Sovereign record. There might be another Primordial record, but there certainly won't be another one after that.
mhm.
So people have to realize that art is maybe something they should spare thought about every now and again
Well,
within this context, because to go from artist to just being a content creator means there just won't be any artists left.
yeah. Well, I've always said that when this shit is over, regardless of when that is, we will enter a resurgence of art and creativity, because I feel like all this isolation and all this anger and all this uncertainty is, we in the metal community, we use pain as a paintbrush. And I think all this is going to lead to a lot of creativity. So when it does come back, we're able to come back with a full on vengeance.
Or it will just mean we get lots of very average records. To be honest with you, unless people can stand on a stage, there's no vengeance. Like I said, we can all sit at home and write records at home, but part of what informs the writing process is the travel, it's movement, it's other people, it's other experiences. So just sitting at home, I mean, okay, we might get some good Funeral Doom records, but I think what you're more likely to get is lots of really awful acoustic folk rock records made by metal musicians because they have too much time on their hands. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope you're right, and I hope that things return to a place where bands can get out there. But we also have to consider that the day of 40,000 people descending on X Festival in Europe to watch 140 bands and from all over the world and in a confined space, that might just not be something that this new world authority is going to allow to happen. Mm-hmm. Small businesses and bars will disappear, small venues will disappear. Will there be a touring circuit? And will 200 people be allowed into a bar that takes 200 people? Mm-hmm. So the truth is that, yes, idealistically you're right, but I'm afraid being a pessimist, and a very brutal pessimist, I tend to. It's, how can we say? I hope to be wrong about what my opinions about what may happen, but I can't lie and say, hey, cool, in my 9 months' time, everything's going to be back to normal, because, it might not be. And I think, well, we'll just have to see. I hope you're right. Yeah. And I hope that my pessimism is ill-founded. But when this all started, I said we'd be exactly where we are in 9 months' time. It's on my podcast. You can hear it. And here we are. So, yeah, man, I don't know. I hope your optimism wins out.
I mean, well, I'm just using elements of history because, like, when you look at the tragedy of what happened to Dimebag Darrell or what happened in Paris, I mean, I remember when the Paris attacks happened like it was yesterday, and I wasn't even allowed in the venue with a hoodie. In fact, I could have I've heard stories that, like, bands that sold hoodies as merch weren't even allowed to sell them there because of security purposes, and concert security completely changed as a result of that. So do I see maybe changes on how we approach this industry and how we go to concerts change? Sure, I could see maybe some changes. I don't think social distancing at shows is gonna. I don't think, even if that was a requirement, that's gonna be the most unenforced thing of all time. And I really ultimately think that we will prevail from this one way or another. Metal has been through so much, and we've always survived, and I think that's a testament not just to the music itself but the musicians who play through it. I mean, you see the tragedy and the turmoil that a lot of musicians have gone through, and this anger. I mean, if they would have
hang on. To be honest with you, I think that these are different and extenuating circumstances. Nothing like this has happened before in the period at which rock and roll has existed for 50 or 60 years. Nothing like this, which is basically the shutdown of more or less the entire world. These are new and extenuating circumstances, and where you say they will be, the most least enforced rules of all time, I'm not so sure about that, because the prospect of digitally draconian measures enforced on society are very, very real. and so therefore it really depends on the jeopardy involved in those in the imposition of a digitally micromanaged semi-authoritarian state. And if that's the future, then something like a heaving rock and roll gig in a tiny bar perhaps doesn't exist. And I think that we need to kind of get real and really consider that maybe as fans of music, we have to stop being emotional beggars. We need to stop, being happy with the things that we're given by authorities. This is going to be very important in the next year or two or three, because a new adaptation and a new normal will happen. The example of the Paris attacks, for example, this scared people in some countries briefly, but things return to normal in 3 or 4 months, like most attacks. They just erect a few bollards and they put a new distancing, but people were still allowed to travel. People were still allowed to go to gigs. No one has stood on a stage in Ireland in 9 months. No one. Mm-hmm. And doesn't seem like it's going to change anytime soon to me. So it's sorry to be so pedantic and disagree with you.
You're being honest, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, brutally honest. And I hope you're right. But I don't think music or art I don't think music or art has been or will be potentially put through something as serious as this since maybe the restructuring of cities in the post First and Second World War, i.e. repairing cities from being literally leveled and what scenes came out of them after that. This has the potentiality to, I'm being a little bit over dramatic there in the visuals that I'm discussing or preferring to you there, but this has the potentiality to curb all of these things.
Sure.
So I mean, and again, if people can't get on a plane freely and travel, doesn't make any difference. You're just going to have local bands playing local gigs to 50 people, and that's means as somebody who plays in bands that have to travel, it means kind of nothing to me, really, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. So, well, not nothing, but certainly I won't be doing any digital shows, any shows online in an empty room or anything else. I won't be subscribing to any platforms to watch, online festivals, etc. And so in this brave new world, comedy, art, theater, artistic expression, these are things that we're going to have to really consider very carefully what they mean to us, because the potential for them to disappear by 75, 80, 90% is very, very real.
Sure.
So respectfully, I disagree that music and metal hasn't been through something like this. If it goes on for another year, 2, 3 years, there won't be anywhere left to play. Okay. So anyway, that's my opinion. So I hope to be wrong.
If you are wrong, we got to do a part 2.
Sure. No, that's no problem.
Yeah.
And look, I'm a pessimistic guy by nature.
Yeah.
I'm a natural born pessimist.
And that's also why you create the doom.
I perfectly am well aware that the circumstances, the situation we are in, are amplifying that pessimism.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I look outside in the world, Ireland, one of the oldest sitting democracies in the world. And in level 5 lockdown, there's police on the streets everywhere. And, nobody has is allowed to have any expression of humanity in a level 5 lockdown. It's very anti-human. So, I can only see what I see. And what I see should terrify people. Mm-hmm. Because the potential for anyway, look, this is not what D&G was supposed to be about, but for art, for musicians, for creativity, for these kind of things, people should be very worried that we're being corralled into just being content creators.
Yeah.
And so if that's my future, I'll quit.
Well, is content creation? I mean, art is content for us to digest in an experience that we share with somebody. I mean, I would consider Caravaggio to just been a content creator of the Baroque period, or Edvard Munch to be, a content creator, or a lot of artists to be. I think that's just the nature of humanity evolving and how we digest material, with how things have gotten compartmentalized over the years, and how, while there are some still things governed by common sense, reality often seems to change on how what the majority perceive it to be.
I'm afraid I couldn't think you're more wrong, to be honest with you. To think that art is not creating content. Art is an expression of something innate, within humanity. It's an expression of humanity. Content creating is a term that we've only really learnt in the last couple of years, and it basically means just making stuff for online. Content created for online. We can't apply that concept to something painted 300, 400, 500 years ago. Sure, it's content in the very broad meaning of the word in the world, but to say that to say that art is a 30-second Instagram video that gets 10,000 likes because it's popular, and that's the proviso for or the measure by which your career as a musician is going to be measured are two very different things. So we can't think of art as just content, because that will mean that many things that that's the victory of low culture, and that means that anybody just managing to make anything that has a vast reach on YouTube. Somebody will say, well, that was art that time when that kid filled his car with shaving foam and got 100 million views, because look at the money that he made. He made good content, but it's not art. And so we need to make that separation, because otherwise, no offense again, but otherwise we're in trouble as a society if we don't make the distinction. Then I think the vulgarians have won.
Well,
so to say.
And again, it's not art that's ultimately changing, it's people that's changing. I mean, if Jackson Pollock was around during, the Baroque period and would do his strip painting, he would have been slaughtered in public or deemed insane. He would have been publicly lobotomized. But now, after the 1960s, after a post-World War II United States, people embraced that. I feel like it's not really so much art that's changing, it's just the way that we as people digest everything and the way that we experience things.
Sure. Okay. Well, on those terms, yeah. I mean, it's if we talk about the concept of content creation in terms of technology or technological evolution, and how this kind of external expression of people trying to sort of, I suppose, monetize every aspect of their lives, and as you say, create content. But I think it's very dangerous to place artists within that framework and sort of try and contextualize them, because we're dealing with something that is, I think, very, very different to anything we've experienced before, and so therefore,
at least in our lifetimes.
Yeah, at least in our lifetimes, the movement of everything corralled into this remote living context is going to leave little room for, because we know this by virtue of the fact that the things that gain the most traction on YouTube are the most inane, stupid, ridiculous things, and that's what people share. And I mean, as several people I know have said, I mean, it's the same with streaming numbers for music. I mean, creating art and music and then being judged on streaming numbers means you're going up against Baby Shark. Well, you're going up against Gangnam Style, because that's what gets the most streams and makes the most money, and therefore that's what the structure around the music industry, whether it's labels, whether it's I mean, we see this in the metal scene where you have joke bands playing now at the end of festivals, stupid cover bands playing 80s pop songs with cartoon graphics, because that gets the most clicks. But you're competing then with the clickbait algorithm that's driven by 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds. And so, it's very fucked up. It's the amalgamation of many different things that maybe previously were separate, or at least had borders, i.e. that children's books were not judged on the same merit as reading, I don't know, Sartre or something. But now everything is all judged on the same context and pretext. And I think that's just very dangerous, especially in the concept, in the situation we're in now, where everything is being corralled online. And as a musician, you have to, you're being asked, like, hey, either fall fallow or get making content. And I see musicians trying to do cooking programs and playing acoustic guitar, pop songs from the 80s to 40 people on Zoom and trying to scrabble around, make a living, and it's fucking depressing and it's dark.
It's
But
depressing, but kind of like what you were saying though, like how material is digested. Like, as metalheads, I despise all the shit that's on mainstream daytime radio. But the fact is that the reason why I think so many people digest it is because when you look at the garbage songs that you would hear, like Cardi B put out or Taylor Swift. I mean, the fact is that that's what the majority of people are into. Like when you look at what the Andrews sisters were singing about in the 1920s about, their men going off to fight in the war, or their men coming back from war, or the way that the United States, the reason why many people related with those artists back at that time is because that's what a lot of people were going into. We as humanity, I feel like, have become very, very shallow, and you're right in that regard. But the fact is that the reason
well,
why
it's
people want to go to a club and hear this daytime, big butt music with the same bass line playing for 4 hours straight, it's because that's what people are into. So they hear something that resonates with what they go through in everyday society.
well, yes, and yes, I agree to a point. I mean, but look, pop music has changed. Music has changed because music is now aimed at pre-teens, pre-adolescents.
Well,
So
to
it can't necessarily have the same impact or meaning to society by and large as it once did, because again, it's basically, it revolves around clicks and stuff as well. It's not necessarily only aimed at that,
yeah, but I
but
mean,
the
like
audience is
the
broader.
when Taylor Swift put out that, like, that song about, like, that came out when I was in high school, and I couldn't go into a single department store without hearing that once, and it drove me insane. But, like, again, as a teenager, I saw everybody playing that song because that's what they related to at that time. I can't, and then here's me as the metalhead being like, oh, can I play you a Tomb of the Mutilated or Butchered at Birth by Cannibal Corpse? I'm like, oh, well, this isn't going to
Well,
resonate with.
the thing about it is also that, I mean, who wants to compete with that? I'm quite happy for metal to be underground and not. I don't need to hear Cannibal Corpse on daytime radio. It was never meant to be there anyway.
Yeah.
In fact, when MTV took up death metal in 1992 or 1993, I didn't like that either. So, I mean, we're just talking about popular culture essentially. I mean, it doesn't bother me. Metal is its own ecosystem. It doesn't need these structures anymore. It's just very simple that once you take away touring and playing live from it, it's like you've cut the artery to the form of music. It doesn't bother me that that heavy metal isn't on mainstream radio anymore. I remember when it was in 1986 or 1988 or 1995 or whatever. Things come and go, and that's just the way it is, at least in mainstream culture. I don't need heavy metal to compete with mainstream culture, but like I said, I'm talking about really the potential society that's maybe looming into view in the next couple of years. And in that framework, taking touring and playing live and all that kind of stuff away from this form of music, which is a kind of an anachronism anyway, will mean that a huge section of it will die.
Hmm.
That's something I don't care about. Cardi B or Ariana Grande or whatever, this stuff doesn't bother me. But
Yeah.
I'm too old for it to make me annoyed, unless I had a fucking 8-year-old who's listening to it, I imagine. But it's
I'm 27 and
yeah,
that shit drives me insane.
Anyway,
But
anyway,
yeah, we drifted.
I gotta go. So
Yeah. But thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it, and this was
no
a
problem.
great discussion. Everybody, we are here with Nemtheanga of the Almighty Primordial, as well as Dread Sovereign. Be sure to check out the brand new album coming out via Metal Blade Records, Alchemical Warfare. This is Alex from Heavy New York.